Pope Francis to a largely group of Muslim, and you said it was a prison, so inmates, recalled or reintroduced the idea of Mary uniting Muslims and Christians. What do you think, Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we need a crusade or anything like that. Don't get it twisted, but there's big differences between us, and we should be at peace with each other. But if that is a lukewarm peace, that we have to concede that Jesus is the way to the Father, he's the only way, then I don't agree with that. If it's to patronize them or patronize us, or for us to compromise what the one true faith is, then I definitely don't agree. I always found it interesting though with Our Lady of Fatima. Like, why Fatima? That was during the First World War. Fatima was Muhammad's daughter's name, and like Mary appeared there in the name of that town for a reason. I know there was some kind of, obviously, it's God's plan, but Mary and Jesus are in the Quran. Mary's the only woman who's mentioned in the Quran, I believe, and Jesus is talked to about a good prophet, but we believe he's not a prophet. He's the Son of God, and he's God himself. He's part of the Trinity. So it's hard to come. I've been getting attacked a lot by Muslims too. Anytime I post about the Trinity, Muslims seem to come out on posts and attack me and just ask a million questions like they're pre-planned. Like everyone's got these sheets now. They're just saying the same thing, so they're pretty easy to just refute. But yeah, we believe in one God. It's the Abrahamic religion. I get all that. But Mary as a bridge to unite us, and I don't think so.
I wrestle with this a lot. So being that I'm Arab American, my parents are from the Middle East, I'm still very much immersed in that culture, and I love my culture. My culture is very heavily influenced by the Islamic culture and Islamic religion. So I've got a lot I could say about this. And so to try to keep it on track, I struggle with the idea of trying to find common ground when the concepts or the persons or the realities that you're trying to bridge are different. And so the Mary of the Bible and the Christian tradition that's preserved in our Catholic faith is different than the Mary of the Quran. And so is that truly a bridge when both sides are different, right? Both sides of a bridge, okay? The idea is that we're connecting through this person. And I struggle with that because then what are we saying? How are we united if the person that we're talking about isn't the same in either tradition? And I know I can get a lot of heat for this, but whatever. When we say we follow the Abrahamic faith and, the same monotheistic God, well, God is different in the Judeo-Christian tradition versus the Islamic tradition, if we're going to juxtapose the three. And so how do we find unity there? Now, we can break it down into the concepts of God. We can talk about things like harmony and peace and brotherly solidarity and concepts of justice, and right. Those are concepts that we can agree on.
Yeah.
I think that's
for all people.
I think that's appropriate. Yeah. But when we're going to talk about persons in particular, we're going to talk about God and Himself. I still wrestle with that. I find it hard to have. To your point, I find it hard to sit down and talk about being one in this Abrahamic tradition if they don't acknowledge the God that we believe in, and if we can't acknowledge the God they believe in. And so how does that lineage seems to be broken? And so where's the common ground found?
Yeah.
And then I ask myself, why are we trying to pursue this as common ground? Why? Is it just an exercise and what we like to say ecumenism, like just reaching out, or not ecumenism, interfaith dialogue? So what's the end goal here?
Yeah, I struggle with, because our Muslim brothers and sisters, they're hostile to the idea of Jesus as God. They just are, and like that's the tenet of our faith. He's part of the Trinity. God is three persons, one God. They do the one God. That's it. It's like what we say. Like, how can that be? Well, it's a mystery. Obviously, it's revelation. But I think part of it too, for me,
like we say that God is one.
Yes.
But God is a mystery in that oneness. He is one in three.
Yeah. It's way
Muslims
different.
take an affront to
They
that.
take a big time affront to it.
And so they, because of their tradition and how their religious beliefs were revealed through Muhammad, according to their faith, God cannot be three.
Yes.
It is a mystery that they can't comprehend. Whereas for the Christian, it is a mystery that we accept, knowing that we cannot comprehend it. Because the majesty of God and who he is in his being is something that's always going to be beyond our ability to grasp and to really wrap our minds around. And we're okay with that. Revelation is something that ought to always agitate us, but not in a negative way.
Yeah.
It stirs us to want to enter deep into the reality and into the mystery. But we will never see eye to eye on that. And we haven't for over 2 millennia.
Yeah, and I don't think we even see eye to eye on who God is either.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, minus the Trinity part. Like, we call God Father. That's an affront to the Muslims. Like, no, we don't have that kind of relationship. We submit. It's a different relationship. Like, when a Christian calls God Father, they take offense to it. Like that, no, you can't call God Father. That isn't how this relationship works. It's top down only. It isn't up and down. It's not both and.
Well, that's because you mentioned it earlier. In the Islamic tradition, they reject Jesus as not just a part of the Trinity, but as the Son. Because Jesus reveals himself as Son. And it's in that revelation of his sonship that we then are brought into this relationship of Father towards God. Right?
That's an affront on the
Jesus
Trinity
brings us in as adopted sons and daughters of God. And then we begin to see ourselves in relation, just like Jesus does. God is our Father. If you're not going to accept Jesus for who he is and who he revealed himself to be, then you haven't become adopted sons and daughters. And therefore, this relationship of Father to me doesn't exist. It can't exist because God is the one that reveals himself. He introduces himself to us. We can't get that through philosophizing and trying to use our own reason to approach God. No, God has to reveal, this is who I am. And in the Christian tradition, he's revealed himself. I am the way, the truth, and life through Christ. Christ reveals the Father through his mission, through his life. We enter into that through baptism. If you reject that, then your understanding of God as Father has no grounds.
And it's an affront. It's like, and obviously God's plans are bigger than ours. Like the way that, they both came from Abraham. We know the stories, but it doesn't mean that we can't learn from each other. It doesn't mean that they accept what they teach and what we teach, but there's other things that we can learn. Obviously, praying 5 times a day, that's a good thing. Like, we should get back to more prayer. That's always good. I like the idea of submitting to God. Like, God, 100%, my surrender to you, but not because I'm scared or you're going to do something to me, because of a loving relationship that I want to freely give my life to God in that submission. I think that's a beautiful thing. And obviously, the increase.
Can I jump in here real quick? There are 3 things, just to keep this simple, because we're not doing a whole podcast on Islam or Islamic Christianity. So, and I mean this with all due love and respect, having this conversation, because I have a lot of dear friends who are Muslim.
Yeah.
Like I just want to start it off with that. There's 3 things that I would say that the average Muslim does that we could learn from, and that the Muslim ideals hold out that we as Catholics can learn from. And that's obedience, which is a wonderful thing. Obedience to God and to God's laws. The community, what they call the ummah, what we would refer to as like the body, the church. There is this reverence that they have for the Islamic community. So obedience to God, this love for the Islamic community, and culture. So the Quran is written in Arabic. That is the official language of Islam, if you will, quote unquote. And so there's translations of the Quran and of the hadiths, the traditions of Muhammad, that exist in other languages. But for you to truly understand it in its purest form as it was revealed, again, this is speaking from like an Islamic perspective, it's to understand them in Arabic. And so what that does for the community, the ummah, is that it keeps them united and together in this preservation of culture. And that's something that we're losing in the West. Yeah. And it's something that we in the West have to be mindful of. So we're seeing this influx in Europe. And by seeing, I mean like as an observer. I'm in America. I love America. God bless America. Mm. But we're seeing what's happening in Europe, where you have this influx of Muslim migrants. They will bring with them their culture. because it is important to them. We ought to, as recipients, as you will, and speaking for like Europeans, as ones who are here, this is our home, we ought to also preserve those parts of our culture that are worth preserving. We ought to not just preserve them, we ought to celebrate them. We ought to acknowledge like when they're being infringed. Like we don't want these parts of our cultures to go by the wayside. But in this postmodern world that we live in, where we're looking to tear down traditions, we're literally bringing down statues and changing laws and how, like the values that were handed on to us, where we're breaking down our culture, that will be replaced by something else, right? The whole concept of a house divided cannot stand. What keeps us united is the culture that we celebrate and that we value. And so in the West, if we don't value and celebrate our culture, it will be replaced in time by something else. And the Muslim community is very good at preserving their culture. They're great at always pushing for, encouraging people to prescribe to obedience to God. It's one of the central tenets of Islam. They're great at keeping the community together, and they're great at celebrating the culture from which the community came, right? And so we have to be mindful of those three things. We can learn from those three things. Yeah. So like you, Christian, how do you practice obedience to God? What role does God play in your life? What role does the body of Christ play in your life? What role does the church play in your life? What do you do to build up the church? What do you do as a member of the church? What part of being a disciple, how do you give back, right, to the church? And then what is that culture that we want to preserve?